There's a new Minions movie in theaters right now, and that means that it's time to rank all 7 films in the Despicable Me franchise. I've always enjoyed this franchise, even though there are some clear missteps, and getting into the ranking, the most clear misstep for me is Despicable Me 4. This movie came out less than 2 years ago, and it's already so forgettable. Continuing the Despicable Me franchise for a 4th movie wasn't a bad idea, but what they managed to cook up for this one was. It really just feels like a compilation of subplots that weren't good enough for their own movie, and I guess they thought putting them all together would turn it into one, but it did not. There are just so many colossal misfires here. You give a new kid named Poppy more screen time than Gru's daughters, who have been the focal point of every movie up to this point. You make easily the most forgettable villain of the franchise, and then there are just little logic things that make me scratch my head. Like, why is Gru's son named Gru Jr.? Big Gru's name is Felonious Gru. He goes by his last name. But then if his son's name is Gru Jr., does that make him Gru Gru? Or Gru Jr.? Or Gru Jr. Gru? It's laughable, but a lot of things in this movie are. It's not all bad, though. I'm not going to act like this film is a complete disaster, because there are some decent moments. The third act, mainly, is probably the most entertaining part of the movie, and then, even though it's the cheesiest and stupidest thing ever, that final scene of them singing "Everybody Wants to Rule the World" in the prison with all the old villains, including Vector flossing, is just the peak of this franchise. Coming in at number 6 is Minions Rise of Gru. It's weird, when this first came out, yeah, there was the whole internet trend of dressing up in suits for it, but at the same time, people were actually saying this was a good movie, and I'm not sure where they got that from. I don't hate it. In fact, I'm kind of just middle of the road on it, but like the last movie, it's just a little bit messy. The first half is great. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really creative way to do a Gru prequel, but as time went on, it went completely off the rails. The third act is totally all over the place. There are Chinese dragons and bulls, and the minions turn into rabbits. It's like it forgets that this used to be a franchise rooted in reality. And obviously I know Gru punches a shark and steals the moon in the first movie, but you know what I mean. It wasn't superpowers and transformations and stuff like that. And the third act is such a shame because, like I said, I was really enjoying the first half, specifically the B-plot, which is always so random in these movies. I'll talk more about it with other films on this list, but the B-plot here is that the minions have to save Gru, but along the way, they're taught Kung Fu by a woman living in an acupuncture clinic. It's just so random, and I love it, but it does get kind of ruined by such a stupid ending. Not a bad movie, just one that can't stick to one identity. At number 5, I have the first Minions movie. I used to think this was terrible, and I still don't think it's great. I can acknowledge its flaws, but as is the same for most of the movies in this franchise, I can look past the flaws and focus on the fact that I'm just having fun. I feel like this was about as good of a concept for a Minions spinoff as you could think of. I mean, obviously the only reason you make this movie is to sell toys, but the fact that there's actually a not terrible story in here is a nice surprise. I love everything about the villain con sequences. I think Scarlet Overkill is actually a decent antagonist, and I can just appreciate how chaotically random this movie is. My favorite scene in particular is when the minions are breaking into the Tower of London and have to get past the guards, and so they just hypnotize them, leading to one of the weirdest movie moments I've ever witnessed. And that moment is just a bite-sized version of this entire movie, and so in terms of its placement, it's the obvious stupidity and flaws keeping it on the bottom half of the list, but it's the chaotic energy it has that keeps it from being any lower. At number 4, I've got Despicable Me 3. The first thing that comes to mind when I think of this movie is its villain, Balthazar Brat. Specifically the scene when he breaks onto that ship while dancing to Michael Jackson. Those moments when he's facing off with Gru and we're watching them go head to head, those are undoubtedly the best parts. Unfortunately, there's so much else here that's just not even close to that good. Obviously, you've got Gru's brother, who is so unbelievably annoying, but you've also got the complete snooze fest of a subplot about Lucy trying to become a better mother figure for the girls. And I'm not criticizing that storyline as if it's a bad idea. In fact, I think that had the potential to be a really compelling part of the film, but it just doesn't hit as hard as it should. It starts off fine, but then devolves into Agnes going on a quest to find a unicorn. Like, it feels like they put 10,000 different ideas on a wheel and just spun it 5 or 6 times to get the story for this movie. But going back to what I said earlier about the B-plots being random and the best parts of these movies, the B-plot here is the minions being arrested and becoming the leaders of the prison before subsequently escaping. And that, once again, is probably the most entertaining part of the movie. If it was just that minion stuff and then it focused on the dynamic between Gru and Brat, and then Lucy and the daughters, this could have been a really good movie, but unfortunately it brings in multiple other plots that make the whole film feel overstuffed. Moving into the top 3, I've got the newest film in the franchise, Minions and Monsters. When I heard months ago that this was described by the filmmakers as a love letter to old Hollywood, I literally laughed out loud, but after seeing the movie, there is not a more accurate description than that. The amount of references and homages this movie pays to classic cinema in the 1920s is so awesome to see, and the storyline it came up with to incorporate the Minions into that world is creative and satisfying. I think the two main minions we focus on here, James and Henry, are the most emotionally compelling minions we've seen in the whole franchise. It's like they're finally starting to figure out how to write these characters to where we as an audience can relate to them without actually being able to understand them. Going back to the B-plot idea, the B-plot here is the Minions third-wheeling a love story between a random robot and a women's rights activist. I'm not even like generalizing or making that sound weirder than it is. That's the literal storyline. It's hilarious. The only real problem I had with the movie was that it has a really weird first half, second half structure that's a tad jarring. Like we're told two different stories in the first and second halves, and I feel like the first is vastly better and more entertaining, but it's not a huge issue. If you want to hear my extended thoughts on Minions and Monsters, I've linked it in the description, and it's also the most recent video on the channel before this one. But coming in at number 2 is the original Despicable Me. This feels like one of the prime examples of that 2000s era of just the most creative and fresh animation ideas you've ever heard. Like obviously Pixar was wheeling and dealing at this time, DreamWorks was in its prime, and then here comes Illumination with one of the best ideas for a movie across any studio. Following a supervillain as he is forced to embrace fatherhood and learn what it means to be a dad, which inevitably forces him to abandon his evil ways. I mean, chef's kiss. And it's not even just the concept that's so good, because the execution is phenomenal as well. This family dynamic is explored so perfectly, and it's done by giving us characters that are well written enough to the point we actually care about them. It seems like such a simple formula to make an engaging story, but it really is that easy. It's not just the central family that works as characters though. The film's main antagonist, Vector, is an absolute joy to watch. He's unlikable and likable at the same time. He's both charismatic and an absolute loser, but everything he does is fun to watch, and he serves as the perfect counterpart to Gru. They start the film on the same level evil-wise, and as Gru goes further to the good side as the movie goes on, Vector goes further to the villain side. Like I said, these are really simple dynamics, but that's really all it takes to be entertaining. The first film in the franchise remains one of the best, and it would have been number 1 if it hadn't been outdone by its sequel. Despicable Me 2 is a film that has always just stuck with me for some reason. It's so thoroughly entertaining, and even though I don't think we're dealing with as genius a concept as we were for the first film, it's just my enjoyment while watching the movie is higher here. The animation is noticeably improved from movie to movie, and it makes for one of my favorite environments in all of animation, the Paradise Mall. I've never known what it is about this place, but it's always been so aesthetically pleasing to me. And I know that's a weird point, but it factors into my enjoyment of the movie, so I can't ignore it. In terms of the story and, things that actually matter, not just the Paradise Mall, I do think this is a very simple and natural progression for all of our characters. Gru turns to the hero side and gets a love interest, as well as opportunities to test his abilities as a father. Lucy is a really nice addition to the franchise, and then El Macho is my personal favorite villain in any of these movies. He's menacing in a way that Vector just never really could be, and his background lore is really fun to hear about. Also, the soundtrack for this movie by Pharrell goes incredibly hard. This is where we got Happy, which is essentially synonymous with this franchise in my mind. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's hard for a movie to not be the best in its franchise when you have a tortilla chip hat. 13 years have passed since this movie came out, and the tortilla chip hat still sticks with me. But regardless, tortilla chip hat aside, despite it being a tight race, Despicable Me 2 is my favorite film in the franchise. If you liked the video and want to help out the channel, feel free to comment your ranking down below. I genuinely want to hear it, and then like and subscribe. We're trying to hit 500 subs as soon as possible. If you want to hear my thoughts on Minions and Monsters, I've put a link in the description as well as one on your screen right now. But if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. Come back next time, and God bless.